Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of Sailor's Disgrace. I'd like to get back to our normal format after that last episode. So to begin, I'd like to use a quote from Edwin Cole. "You don't drown by falling in the water. You drown by staying there." And that's exactly what I was doing. I was drowning. I stayed in that state of denial and complete suppression of what had happened to me and sometime in 2004. For the rest of my time on the chase, for sure, I continued drinking. I don't remember much. I remember getting underway, having port calls. I do remember being with friends and certain events, but most of it is a complete fog. And to keep it short, this really isn't about my Coast Guard career. I like to focus on trauma and recovery, but for a timeline and sequence of events, I left the chase eventually. I became a marine science technician, so I had to go to Yorktown, Virginia for 8 weeks. I went there in March of 2005, and I graduated about 8 weeks later in May of 2005, and I wound up in Portland, Maine. I did not intend on going there. I actually wanted to go to Guam, but long story short, I wound up in Maine instead, kind of the exact opposite. And my time in Maine, I was 20 years old. I was not yet 21. I didn't turn 21 until September of that year. But I was very isolated. I remember being by myself. I was in the barracks for a while, and then I lived with my chief in his basement, rented out his basement, and I was very lonely. But I had some friends. I made friends fast. Some really good friends in Maine that I still talk to. Some coasties, but I really felt alone. And fortunately or unfortunately, a good friend of mine from the chase was down in New Hampshire, so I was able to see him a lot, but we would basically just get blacked out every time we saw each other. He was very much into partying, and I was drinking a lot, and that's what we did. And for me, I think that just helped to ignore what had happened. I was at a complete loss of myself. I didn't have any goals or ambition. I was just floating. I was existing, and just barely. I really felt like I was detached from myself. I was just going to work. I was doing well. I made rank. I actually made E5 in less than 2 years from graduating from A school, and I did well. I was still able to do my job, and I think that also helped me to suppress it. I was very focused on advancing. I was focused on gaining qualifications and performing well. But after hours or when I wasn't at work, I was blackout drunk pretty much all the time, especially when I turned 21. And I moved upstairs from a bar on the west end of Portland. And it was a great time. It was fun being young and living upstairs from a bar, but I don't remember a lot of that period. And it was very difficult. I started having physical problems because of the rape. I didn't attribute it to the rape at the time. I had already suppressed it so much, it wasn't even a conscious thought. It was completely separate as an individual issue. And what was happening was I was actually bleeding a lot from my anus, and I would hide it. I would use toilet paper and try to basically shore the dams and stop the blood, and it happened a lot, and to a point where I actually saw a doctor in Maine, but I did not follow through with him. I was so scared of what it might mean, and I wasn't even relating it to the rape at the time. I was just relating it to shame of bleeding everywhere. I was bleeding through my uniform. I had to bleed sitting down in chairs sometimes. I have to hide it and clean it, and it was awful. I was constantly hiding that. And it wasn't until 2007 when I left Maine, and actually at the time I was dating someone, and we got married in 2008. And we both went to San Francisco in 2007. And about a year later, my bleeding got so bad that my wife, we were married at the time, she made me go see a doctor in Oakland. And I knew I had hemorrhoids, and I thought that's all it was. And they were so bad, I actually had to have surgery. And to backtrack a little bit, I went to Coast Guard medical first, and that was petrifying. It was terrifying. I remember being in the doctor's office and explaining to the doctor that I had hemorrhoids and they hurt really bad, and I'm not sure what to do. The cream wasn't working, and what recommendations he had for me. And for those of you in the military, you know that in order to work in a clinic, you have to be certified, you have to go through training, you have to have HIPAA training and all that kind of stuff. Well, he brought in this young female non-rate from one of the cutters in Alameda who was interested in becoming an HS. And she hadn't gone to training or anything. She was just interested in becoming a health service technician. And he brought her in without my permission and asked if I could show her my rectum. She was embarrassed. I said no. I actually stood up for myself that time. And I couldn't even grasp why he would ask that. And he said, well, she's never seen it before. I just want her to see that. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not comfortable with this. And she left the room embarrassed. So anyway, that was my first incident with dealing with a medical professional after my rape. It was about 2-3 years after, about 4 years after my rape. And it was not a pleasant experience. Anyway, I go through the doctors in Oakland, I get referrals, and they say I need surgery. So I have a corrective surgery. I have the hemorrhoids removed. I go in for a post-surgery follow-up with the doctor. And this is my first glimpse back into my rape. And again, I couldn't face it. I denied it instantly in my head. But when I went back for that follow-on visit with the doctor after my hemorrhoidectomy, he looked at me and said, well, we took the hemorrhoids out, Mr. Bell, but you know what else we found? And I said, no. And he said, we found warts. We found genital warts in your anus. Are you a homosexual? Do you have sex with men? And that's exactly what he said to me. And I was so scared that I didn't know what to say. And I remember mumbling, no, I've never. That's all I said. I said, no, I've never. And in my head, I think there was something there. I think there was something that tried to come out, but it wouldn't. It couldn't. I still wasn't able to face it. And I certainly wasn't going to tell this doctor who was accusing me of being a homosexual after a surgery to correct hemorrhoids. And maybe if he had been more compassionate and not so accusatory in his tone, and he was something else. I remember the nurses complaining about his attitude and behaviors too. He was a very, very stern person. The whole process with him was not pleasant. And that scared me so much that I just buried it even further and did not say anything. So time goes on, and I'm still drinking. I'm married and all that, but I was still drinking. I was still forgetting everything. And a lot of that period of my life is also hazy. But again, just like I was in Maine, I did very well for myself as far as the Coast Guard's concerned. I advanced again. I made E6 in 2009, so about 2 years after I made E5, and I gained major qualifications in my profession. I was doing very well, and I just kept going. I kept going as far as that's concerned. My life was on autopilot. I would drink, I'd just forget everything and black out, and even when I didn't drink so much, it was just a constant flow of alcohol in my life, and I used that as a crutch, and it shielded me for a long time, I think. And I continued this life and that pattern of doing well in my career. So after San Francisco, I went to Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan in 2011. 2 years later, I made chief, 2013, and left Sault Ste. Marie, went to Baltimore. Worked there for 3 years until 2016 when I made warrant officer. Like I said, I got stationed in Houston, and that's when everything changed for me. And that's when my life was completely thrown upside down, and I had to rebuild myself. And that's where I'll leave this episode. And I just want to reiterate how everything went from about 2004 to 2016. I summarized a lot in between, but I was completely lost as a person. I had this outward shell of a model coastie, and good person, strong person, and I was fun. I had friends, and I did all the Coast Guard stuff that I was supposed to. I advanced, I promoted, I worked hard, I stood extra duty, I partied like I was a chief. I partied out there, and I drank with my crew, and I drank with my friends, and I did everything that I was supposed to do. And I fit in very well, and I did well in my job. I actually enjoyed many of the aspects of my job, and I feel like I made some positive impacts despite everything I went through. But 2016 is when everything came crashing down around me. And that's where I'm going to leave this episode. So thank you again for listening. Please comment, send suggestions. If you have any ideas, I'd love to hear them, and I'd love to talk to you all soon. So as always, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you on the next one.
Woke up this morning